Loni Ding is a filmmaker, an advocate, a community organizer, a teacher, Chinese American. Many of the people in this room are familiar with your work, Loni. Thank you for coming to talk to us about it. You grew up in San Francisco.
Yes.
But you did not grow up in Chinatown in San Francisco. You're a Chinese American.
Mm-hmm.
You have spoken of feeling often an outsider, of a duality. Can you tell me a bit about your childhood?
Well, I grew up at a time in San Francisco when it was not possible for Chinese and really people of color generally to live just anywhere in the city. So when my parents wanted to live in an area where they wanted their kids to speak English without a Chinese accent, they thought that was very important to our future. They wanted to move out of Chinatown. So they looked around for a long time and finally found a place that would rent to us. It took 5 years to find this place. Years later, they completely got rid of those kind of practices of people signing a real estate contract that said that this house, this apartment would not be sold or rented to someone who was not white. They changed all that much later, but when I was growing up, it was still very hard to just live anywhere. And my parents moved us, therefore, into a part of the city which at that time had nothing but white working class people. They were Catholic, Portuguese, Greeks, Italians, Irish, working class, not middle class and not the suburbs. And growing up in that kind of an environment, we knew we were like the first of the families to be there. And we were the Ding family. I was one of 7 kids. We're a large family. And I was the last of the 7. So I got all my instructions from my parents and my older sisters and brothers, whom I was very obediently listening to, or else. And they would say we had to behave ourselves, all of us, because we represented the family. We represented the only Chinese around for miles. And so we had to behave in a way that was like diplomatic behavior. So I got used to what I would call diplomatic behavior outside the family. As soon as I walked out the door, that was the outside world, and I had to be on my best behavior, okay? And I think I developed from that a sense that there's an outside world and an inside world. There's an outside the family and an inside the family. And that all of my life, how I saw things and how I understood things would have to be in terms of what maybe I really thought and felt as compared to what was the right thing to do for the sake of my family or for the sake of the people that they saw me as representing. And so I had this kind of what I call kind of a double bookkeeping system in my mind of keeping very close and sure of what it is I really thought about things, whether or not I would be able to say anything about it or act on it, and then what I thought really I would have to do as part of my duty, my responsibility, in order for us to live peaceably in that neighborhood. And so I would say that that started very early in my life, of thinking about 2 ways of looking at things, which meant I had to understand myself, and I had to understand other people, and they may or may not meet. I may have to keep them separate, but that it was all in the, for the sake of getting along in life and moving ahead.
Was that a burden?
I never thought of it as a burden. I do not ever now think of it as a burden. I think of it as something that was just mine to do, and I learned a lot from it. I think it made me a more interesting person. Excuse me why I say that. I just gave me an inner life, It's not like not everything you see is what you get. There's something more inside. I think all of us, in fact, have that. We all have things that we keep which is ours. Partly it's our secret, maybe, or maybe it's just that part of the mystery of who we are, which even you know someone very well, or you think you know yourself very well, there's always a part that's also even you are surprised at. Even you could be surprised at something about yourself. And I would say that it helped me develop that whole part of myself. And to understand that other people were the same way. Very possibly what they were presenting to me was also not everything that was what it is
Mm-hmm.
more.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I think later in life, when I started doing interviewing with people, especially about difficult things that went on in their life, I knew that I had to listen with not only the ear that hears the words, but with the ear that hears what might be actually going on inside. Something, what I call an inner ear, and waiting for that part of themselves to come forward. which may or may not come forward easily, but in time, if you're very patient and you take the time, it'll come out. If it's important to them, it'll come out.
And do you recognize it when it does? Do you know immediately that's it?
I think you have a sense of like a twinge, you know? You get this sense of like a little, don't you have that happen to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, and then you say, I must follow this. I have to follow this, wherever it leads. I'll follow this up with more questions. I don't just say, and my next question is, right? You just follow that. Yes, sure. I think you do know.
I think particularly if you're doing a news interview, you immediately recognize when something newsworthy has been said.
Right.
And then you follow up on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, the interview is pretty much over. Because from a news standpoint,
right.
You've got what you want, you go away. It may take you an hour to get there. It may take you a minute to get there. Then it's done.
Right, because you have a very particular thing you have to turn out, which is your news package. Right?
Right.
And you know what the elements are for that.
Right.
And so you said, do I have those elements? No, I still haven't gotten this and that point from, in the way of questions. You've got to go there. I have the same kind of considerations when it comes to, has this person said something that I will be able to use pretty much as is? Or am I going to have to put in a lot of, verbiage ahead of time to set it up? So then I have to go some more into it. That kind of consideration, yeah.
Maybe I need to get him to say the same thing again.
Yes.
But hope he does it in a more conducive way.
Do you ever feed him a little opening line? You say, and when I went to this, college, I thought, ... and they finish it for you?
I've tried not, as a matter of ethics, news ethics, journalistic ethics, I suppose, to lead, but in so many words. But you can lead in other ways as well. That,
right. Yes.
Maybe you can sleep with. We have a question from Ms. Marr.
I was just wondering how old you were when you moved into that neighborhood.
I was 1.5. I was 3. I was 3 when I moved in that neighborhood. And what that meant, because I was the youngest child, is that there was no one to look after me during the day. My father was running an herb business. My other sisters and brothers were all in school. They were in by kindergarten. My next sister was 2 years older. She was in kindergarten. So I would be alone in the house, but my father wasn't really very good at looking after kids. So my mother would have to take me with her, which meant that I would travel from one end of town where was all white, past many districts, all the way into Chinatown. And so I would have this wonderful time. That's what I mean, it's not a burden. I had a wonderful time as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, looking at everybody in this bus, in this tram. We used to sit opposite each other. My mother said, don't cross your legs. Chinese girls don't do that. It's unladylike, right? And all these other things you're not supposed to do because it's unladylike. So I said, do you mind if I go and stand next to the driver? Because I want to see how he does it. She said, yes, but don't say anything to him. So I would watch him drive. And that was kind of terrific. What other 3-year-old gets to do that every day? Every day would go from that part of town into Chinatown, where my mother ran another herb store. My father ran an herb store. My mother ran an herb store. I would go from one end of the city to the other. And that meant I got to see the city every day in this, being taken along by my mother. So from 3 to 5. And during that time, I really only spoke Chinese because my mother and father were the main people talking to me, and they only spoke Chinese. So my English didn't really get going until I got into kindergarten, which is very interesting, considering that, I'm American-born and all that. But that, to me, is like part of what has gone into my life and allows things there to be triggered, to be responsive to things and people that I meet later in life, that it reminds you of something. There's something to resonate with. So I'm very pleased with that.
Your mother ran an herb store. Your father ran an herb shop.
Yes.
Your mother was educated as a medical doctor, wasn't she?
Yes, she was.
How did that?
How come about?
Yeah.
Okay, this is now, my mother arrived in 1919. You were not allowed to become a citizen if you're foreign-born Chinese, or foreign-born Asiatic, Mongolian, Oriental, whatever, they're changing names as time went on. You could not become a citizen at that time. So there was no way that she would have been able to, say, learn English in order to be able to use her Western-style medical training, which she had done. She wouldn't be able to use that in the United States unless she had her citizenship. She had to have citizenship to be licensed to practice. So she had to leave that behind. But she was already in 1919 a very liberated woman, I guess you would put it that way. I remember seeing her in her 1919 outfit. She was wearing strictly a flapper outfit, you know, the outfit, and the cut of hair. And she was in this Shanghai studio having her picture taken, and she had her hand like this, you know, 1919, like this. And she had a man's watch on. And I looked at that picture and I said, that woman had to leave China soon, you know? She's not going to make it in China. So, because that's exactly what my father married her. My father wanted a westernized woman. Well, he got one. He didn't know what he was in for because he was really Confucianist. My father was a trained Confucianist. But he thought, he believed in liberal Western democracy. He did. And he didn't know what it would be like to live in the same house with someone who really was that way. Because my mother had been raised in a Christian boarding school. So she, in Guangzhou, in Canton City. She left home very early to go to boarding school. So she's a very unusual person. And she actually named me after Isadora Duncan. My formal name is Isadora. On my passport it says Isadora, all right? Isadora Welsh. My husband's name is David Welsh. So I'm Isadora Welsh, Isadora Ding Welsh. Isadora is Isadora Duncan. My mother thought of her as a very wonderfully liberated woman, right? She didn't know she practically danced nude on the Boston stage. But this was wonderful to, you know, to come from that kind of family where both my parents wanted us to, you know, just meet the world head on and try to make it happen and do our part for it. That's basically what they said. My father said, there's only two people I never want to see you marry. You cannot marry a lawyer, and you cannot marry a minister because both of them use words to maneuver around in life. Don't trust them, okay? Because he didn't know I was going to use pictures to maneuver around in life later. I don't know how you could trust that person either. But anyhow.
Did your mother ever get to practice medicine?
Well, she did in China, of course. Yes, she did in China, but not here. I think she just took what she knew and sort of merged what she understood about herbal medicine. I will say that both my parents, as I said, never spoke English really adequately. But we lived in, as I said, a completely English-speaking or Spanish or Portuguese-speaking part of the city. And yet, it's amazing to me that people who had ills, and by the time they came to see someone like an herbalist, they had a lot of ills that they had not gotten any satisfaction from Western medicine. They would come and see my father and my mother, and my father and mother somehow managed to convey to them without language that they could trust them, that they understood what your pain or your ache was about, and that you should try this bottled herb and also put this ointment on your skin and take these little pills that we kids in the back room are already wrapping little packages. We're making little packages of pills. And they managed to make a living out of that, adequate to send all of us to college. So they did a very good job of practicing medicine, if you want to put it that way.
Communicating
Yes,
as well.
communicating, yes.
Fantastic job of communicating.
Yes, I think so. And I really do believe that because they had confidence that they could do this, they were sure of themselves. My parents were very sure of themselves. They were sure of themselves coming from a culture. They were sure because they were highly educated. They were sure because they understood what the society was about, even though they didn't have the language. But you know, the Chinese newspapers have a lot. We have 18 Chinese newspapers, Chinese language newspapers in San Francisco to this day. So it's really possible, you know, to be an educated person, to know what's going on in the world, and not speak the language of the society, although you want to move towards it, you can. And then it's a matter of, do you really have the right to use that language? And will, for instance, your voting materials be printed in more than one language, which they are still in California. I don't know what they are out here in the East Coast. You don't have the same kind of numbers of people who need that kind of material. But the whole business of communicating in a language, anyhow, is more than just language. It is your intent, it is your expressive power, it is your desire to get across to the other person, it's how carefully you listen to them, which means listening not only to the words, but their gesture, what you can tell by their manner, what are they really kind of saying to you, and then carefully you can work your way towards understandings, which can work out very perfectly well. And I think many of you probably come from foreign-born parents. And I think that that's really the attitude to take, that they are making their way in the world, and their language should not be an embarrassment to them. Certainly, you should not be making them embarrassed. Oh, my parents don't speak English. Don't be embarrassed about it, because they will find their way. And a lot of it, they'll find their way faster if you respect them exactly the way they are. I don't want to tell you to do this, but that's what I think happens in life, is that you support the person exactly the way they are, and they start moving along to wherever else they have to go. That's really it. I don't think we get them there by saying, isn't it terrible that you're not already there, or punish them for not already having those abilities. They have a lot of other virtues and a lot of other values that they can bring to anything, especially to raising us.
Lonnie, I'd like to move ahead to the Vietnam War. You were at ground zero of the anti-war movement in those days, which was Berkeley, California. And you got very heavily involved in the anti-war activities and in the movement. You in fact left college, I believe, to full-time organize against the war. Tell me a little about why you did that and about that time and what was going on.
I think you've probably all seen movies called Berkeley in the 60s, or the 60s is in the 60s, that you must be very, very tired of it, you know? And you don't want to hear one more person tell you about the 60s. I'll just tell you what it was to me and what I got from it. The 60s to me was that period after World War II, and right during the time, basically, or after, so to speak, was still really happening, that you had the civil rights movement in the South, which was an incredibly dynamic, powerful, engulfing thing. I don't know whether you know that or not. If you've ever seen the series called Eyes on the Prize, 6 parts, part 1, 6 parts, part 2, if you see that, I think you cannot help but understand that that was a monumental event in American history when it comes to things having to do with race and whole groups of people and how they're going to find their place in the society. And so I'm coming from that time, and I'm thinking, when I was during the civil rights movement, I was watching these attack dogs, you know, being unleashed on the end of a leash from a sheriff attacking these students. I'm watching the fire hoses washing them down. I'm seeing this in my own living room. And who's to say what makes you respond the way you do? But my response to that was, this can't be happening, and I have to do something about it. So my response was to go south, was to go to Mississippi that summer. I didn't make it. A lot of family reasons stood in my way. I just didn't make it. But my husband, who I'd since married, was down there exactly that same summer. I think it's not an accident that we married each other, you know. Although it was an accident, because he's way up in upstate New York, and I'm in California, and our meeting was like, you know, very unlikely, I'll tell you that. But it's because we had certain interests in common, obviously. I now feel these things happen because they have reasons. So I just had this response that what was happening in that fight was my fight. I'm not, you know, but it was my fight. Of course, it's all based on a whole earlier set of understanding of what it meant to be this Chinese family in this white neighborhood in which we always have to watch our steps very carefully. And being aware that it was unjust, how I didn't feel it was unjust to me so much as I felt the injustice towards my parents. I felt my family, I felt my parents were just incredible people. And why is it that nobody in the neighborhood or my teachers could not understand who they really were? Why was that? And then later going to school, you know, college, and looking around and seeing that Jews were also cut out. And I said, gee, Jews are white, how come? I think that's like a strange thing maybe to you, but it was very new to me. So I would say civil rights already was triggering me to that awareness of certain things that are happening in a large way. And what Vietnam was simply looking at people on the TV set, and it was very clear to me that they were people who looked like me. To me, it was like they're Vietnamese, whatever they are Asiatic, they are Asians, they are Orientals, they are all those things that I seem to other people to be, and all the people that I kind of know are like too. And they were being treated this way, and I just couldn't bear it to watch that. I couldn't bear things that are called body counts that had never any sense of who those people were as a people. I mean, they're not Chinese, they're not Japanese, they're not any of those things, and this is something I really only understood later when some Vietnamese students came to my house and brought some Vietnamese music records and played them. For the first time, I heard their culture, and I realized that I had never heard one bit of their culture ever on the TV, ever during that whole war. You know, never heard what their music sounded like. I heard this guttural language being spitted out, but that's it. I didn't have a sense that they were really a whole people. I didn't feel that, and I felt that when they came in and played those records. I think that I just felt that after all, it's not like it's a very unusual feeling. I was one of many, many people who felt the same way about that war and who acted on the basis of it. You may or may not agree with what they did, but I can say that it was a very powerful, very pervasive, very widespread feeling. It was across the whole country. You said you were reporting on it in the East Coast. It just happened. It started out in California. It started at Berkeley. It started at, you know, places like that. And when it first started, it was just a handful of teachers, senior teachers. I was just a graduate student at the time. I was TAing in the courses. I certainly was not a faculty person, but among the faculty, only 5 in that whole campus who really stuck their neck out, who really said this is wrong. And they, you know, went down for it. And they would find that their friends, some of their friends would say, oh, it's such a complex thing. They would wring their hands and say, I can't figure out this war. I just don't know what to think or what to do. And so it would break up relationships. It would break up collegial relationships. It would break up marriages when people didn't see eye to eye. That was that kind of a cutting edge issue. When people couldn't see eye to eye on that war. It was that basic. It's like you find out somebody thinks something very different from you on the most critical issue. You say, you know, I can't go on seeing this person anymore. I can't think about, you know, dating them or marrying them or being married to them maybe even. It's really interesting that that would happen. So I was just part of that, and I'd also seen one of my students, one of my fellow students, be washed down the stairs, the marble steps of City Hall in San Francisco. When she went, she was British, she was an English student, and the British had more of a long history of acting politically as students at that time. And she went to protest the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was sort of anti, you know, un-American activities kind of stuff. This was before the Vietnam War. And she went to protest, and the students pounded on the door and said, let us in, we want to be in on this session where they're interviewing people. And so they called the police and they called the fire department and literally used the fire hoses inside the city hall, main city hall, this gorgeous city hall with a wonderful spiraling staircase, and washed the students down the steps, including my friend who had her head knocked down as they dragged her down the steps. She was washed down the steps, and then they dragged her some more. And I thought, you know, this is serious stuff. You cannot not be taking sides. You can't say, oh, you know, it was one of those things. Shouldn't have been there anyhow, right? She shouldn't have been there anyhow, and, you know, just stay out of it. Don't get involved, because it can get you into serious trouble. What I was saying to myself was, why is this happening? Why are the police doing this? Why did the city fathers think this is so important that they would literally be willing not just to do that to those students, but how about drenching the place in water, right? You're talking about water seeping underneath the doors into people's offices. This is damaging. They must have had a big problem washing out rugs or something. Anyhow, I looked at that and I said, something is going on here. Now, I was not into politics at all. When people were standing on the corner and saying, you know, this or that, extremely radical analysis of things, the Communist, the Socialist Workers' Party, the this and that, I was really not buying into that. I was really not ready to go whole hog for any of that kind of analysis. And to this day, I don't think that I go whole hog for any analysis of that kind. I was really watching very carefully what was happening in front of me and saying, what am I seeing? What is this about? And what do I feel about it? And what am I ready to do about it? Or do I want to do nothing about it? I was just going to go back into the stacks and write my dissertation. I was in the middle of my dissertation. I completed my written exams, my orals, my language exams, the whole thing. I was writing my dissertation. I'd gone to China, Hong Kong to do interviewing for my dissertation. I was supposed to write it. Okay, here I said to myself, gotta go back into the stacks and sit down and quietly bend myself to the job of going through my notes and doing a lot of reading and writing this dissertation? And the answer is no, I could not. Now, I'm not saying that no one else could do it or anyone else should not have done it, but I could not, okay? To me, it was not direct enough. To me, there was something else that was more had just caught me up and was more important to me. And maybe I didn't really want to be a researcher for the rest of my life. I don't think I wanted to write what I consider very turgid academic articles. It wasn't direct enough for me. In any case, I certainly didn't think of myself as an artist, I promise you. And to this day, I do not think of myself as an artist, even though I am in exactly the business where form and rhythm and shape and all those things that have to do with art, you know, craft and art, are very important. Otherwise, you don't have a piece of work at all that works if you're not paying attention to not only the content, but how it's presented, its shape, its form, its rhythm, its tension, all that. Well, I've learned that since, and I use it. I keep trying to improve it, but I don't think that gives me a name. Even to call me a filmmaker, you know. Bill was just asking me, are you a filmmaker or a videographer? Well, you know, I found it easy just to say filmmaker, but of course I do both, but mainly I do video. Does it matter? I'm not sure, except in the business it matters. Do you use film? Do you use it? I use whatever I can get my hands on, you know? And whatever doesn't cost me too much at the moment for which I have the money, or that I don't want to spend all my time with my tin cup going and begging for the money to pay for it, or go into debt, which I have, into serious debt to complete a piece of work, and make, you know, borrow money on your mortgage in order to pay for it. I mean, you don't want to do that. I do not want to do that. I don't recommend that to anybody. So I would say that's kind of like how I got caught up in it. And it's the reasons why are like same reasons other people perhaps for being involved in that war. Except that it was just closer to home, and there wasn't anyone starting it up yet. As soon as it started, it was here, it was at the University of Wisconsin in large ways. It was at Columbia in large ways. It was many places, but those are the major sites where we had interconnections with each other all the time. It was just a time, I think, where a lot of people together at one moment in history recognized that some particular thing was at stake and they wanted to act on it. I would not be surprised if it happened again. I really think there are other issues that people can get very much together on. I don't know what you feel about what happened at WTO in Seattle, but I think that was another one of those moments where different groups, the environmental groups, the labor groups, other groups got together. You know, they said, I think the banner said, Teamsters and turtles together. It's like, you know, turtles. They're trying to save the turtles, and the Teamsters trying to do their stuff. I think I think we should be very happy about that. You know, that something is happening other than the day-to-day, ongoing, schmoozy, you know, kind of stuff that's going on in politics. That constant thing that we still have to pay attention to, that we don't want to be too cynical about, because it's our lives they're playing around with, you know. They are dealing with our lives. Nevertheless, you look for a little honesty, you look for some people you can work with, and you look for someone who is going to go into leadership position, or that you are going to help get in a leadership position, that you, given all the compromises that are made, they'll pretty much do what you want, what you believe in. So then, are you going to work for it or not? That's really just the other question.
You spoke of rhythm. The rhythm of this interview is such that we're on a fixed timetable, and we're down to about 5 minutes to talk about Loni's work.
I'm sorry.
But this stuff, well, it's been fascinating, of course.
Well, so I get carried away. You have to kind of like stop me.
You brought me back to a quote I saw of yours that said, "We're living in very terrible times, very difficult times."
Yeah. Maybe, did I say that?
You did. And I think you said that in 1996.
Oh, 96. That's 4 years ago now.
Everything better now?
I think it's more exciting now. I think the more things happening. I think that, I think people are onto it. I think they know what's happening, and it's only whether there's a moment and again coming together, to be together and acting on it, instead of being alone. That's the only problem I have with, you know, high tech and the websites and all that stuff. I think we all should be into it, but the more time we spend on that, the less time we have for each other and we're going to, virtual reality is never going to be reality. Okay, I just want to be really, really clear about that, that we should never lose any sense that something in the computer or whatever is anything like actually getting up, walking away from it, and going out and meeting people and doing things that you want to do. There's nothing that substitutes for that. So I think we are into that high-tech set of possibilities of incredible reaching out and connecting with people and meeting people that we never really have met, but we can start that. I'm very excited about that. I think it's wonderfully promising. And I love the sophistication of people now. I mean, the ability, the emotional and mental sophistication, meaning I don't think it's possible to fool people too much too long. I like to think that. I think I've seen that. That doesn't happen. And so people get on to the real stuff. And I think there's maybe more tolerance than there has been, and more forgiveness for the fact that you're going to make mistakes and other people make mistakes, and you're going to keep on working together and do something. And you aren't going to keep, hounding yourself about what you've done wrong or whipping yourself on the back to be better, get ahead, and not allow someone else to gain on you. That whole competitive stuff, I think, is really disabling. I think it takes life away from us. So there has to be something instead of that. It has to be some kind of connection to each other, ways that people come together to do things and still have their separate lives, but they have to be able to come together. And what is going to make that happen? That's what I want to know. And I think high tech makes part of that happen as a possibility, just in terms of the means to do it. Then people have to want that, I like to think that they do want it. Maybe, I don't know. What do you think?
Does anybody have any questions for Loni? But yeah.
The first was, were there any experiences in your when you went to school that affected your being more open to the civil rights movement or things that happened? Were there conflicts as you traveled between Chinatown and the other world? Could you talk about that? And then the second is on your work. What I like about your work is you deal with some very real issues and very complex issues. You don't shy away from how difficult it was for immigrants or how painful it might have been for a whole community of people. And yet at the end of your work, in numerous films, there's this wonderful sense of empowerment and hope that makes it a joy to watch, that I know as I've watched gives me a hope for our future as a community, as a people. So if you could comment on both of those things.
It is true that if you look at the relentless history as it's officially written on people of color, when it is written officially, I'm thinking like what's in the textbooks when they deal with it, it's just kind of a litany of terrible things that were done to them. This was done to them, this was done to them. The blacks were brought in slavery, and this was happened, that happened. There's something about all that that just is untrue. I mean, it is true that all that happened, but what's missing, of course, is what the people who underwent that, who either lost their lives or survived it, what did they think or feel about that? That's what's missing. And as soon as we get into that, you try to, okay, you say, you run down the line of the litany of what was done. They had to face this, they had to face that, and then this happened and that happened. But if you really get to also, well, what was going on in their mind? Well, there are the powerful people, or the people who have the official positions, and they're the people who are able to make these terrible decisions that do all these things, that take up 120,000 Japanese Americans, just pull them out of their homes and leave everything behind and remove them to, these camps in the wilderness. Someone did that. But if that's all you're about, is just telling the story of what official in the government, in the military, did this or that to them, that is there's a huge missing story. The missing story is, what did the people who underwent this think and feel about it as people who want to survive and who have dignity that they are careful to watch out for? I mean, when you watch the pictures of the Japanese Americans being picked up and taken with all their, what they could carry in their hands. And you see the mother carrying the child. Let's say that's about all she's going to carry is carry with this child and one other thing, and that's all she's going to be able to carry. It looks terrible. You think that's it, that's the end. It isn't the end. What's missing is what's going on inside their mind and their hearts. And that's always what's most interesting. And I think that's what we really have to strive to attain. And when we get that part of the story in, then it's not, it doesn't come off as just painful, you know, lamenting loss. It is also about what people learn from it, what they did to try to deal with it. And you have to admire and respect yourself and them when you see how they were trying to figure this out, what they thought they would try to do it. Even when they lost, you can't always make it work. You can't always win. But if you really try, that's the humanity of it. And that's, to me, what the story is defined. And I think that's what I've always searched for. And when I don't always get it entirely in their words, I make it up. You know? I mean, fiction, right? That's it's called documemoir. I can do a little fiction and a lot of hard work on the actual place, the actual things they had, the actual words they did speak, the legal documents that tell us what they did and all those things. Then I take a few liberties and say, you know, if I had to imagine what was going on in their minds, I would think they might say something like this, da 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 da. I thought, I felt, I wanted, I didn't want. I was trying to get such and such. You know, all those things that are in the first person that give you the sense that this is someone acting in history. And that's what it's about to me. As far as what happened in school, I don't think there's any one thing. I was constructing my own identity out of a sort of a mishmash of my friends. I said, I made a little name for myself, which was the first initial of my favorite people. I said, I want to be this person that had, you know, GYTMO stood for certain particular people that I really loved. You know, I figured that, okay, you have to shape yourself in life. I'll just pick a little this and that and this and that. And all these things are people who I met in school mostly. You know, they would be people I met in school. But no one particular dramatic thing happened to me in school to sort of affect that. It was just people I met, things I saw, nothing too dramatic, just thinking about it. And being lucky. You have to be lucky too, I think. Yeah, I would say that.
We're down to about 2 minutes to talk about your work. That's what I think.
You want to talk about my work?
Give me 2 minutes on your work.
Oh,
your
gosh, what do you want to know? What do you want to say?
Memoirs.
Documemoir.
What you're working on now, the project
Didn't
is two-thirds complete for PBS.
Yes.
What have you been hoping to accomplish with the body of your work? You said when you were a child you knew that you were powerless. We were powerless. Has your work helped to correct that situation? Do you have power now? Is that something that this has been about?
Someone had their hand up.
Yes.
Yes, I guess I was impressed as you related your life story about the evolution from the beginnings in San Francisco when your parents teaching you what was right to be in the outside world, you're not crossing your legs, etc., versus how far you've come in terms of not, I hear what you're saying in terms of the positive aspect that your parents' culture bring, but you also seem to have moved beyond that. I think in line with that question is just if you can comment on that process of how you've gone maybe beyond the compliance of being an Asian American to something that is a wonderful, something in process. And I don't have the words exactly for it, but I hear it unfolding as you talk. If you follow my gist, I'd like for you to comment on that, your own personal evolution from being the obedient, compliant, Chinese American who represents the community to grappling with very real societal issues and not just taking what the status quo has to say?
I feel my parents, thank you for that question, I feel my parents and I myself have always really pushed the envelope, okay? I don't feel my parents said, you know, bend to whatever you have to do. I felt that there's a sense of discipline that you must have and rigor, that you don't just go, I want to express myself. That's not enough to my mind. That's a luxury we didn't have anyhow. And maybe it's a luxury sometimes that some people should have. But yesterday, for instance, I heard the Two Tongues group, and one of them was saying, damn it, I want to see my father's anger. I don't want him to go back to his crossword puzzle. I want his anger. I want to see his anger when he's mistreated. Well, maybe he can't do that for his generation and in his time, but you can. And you can partly because of whatever else he accomplished. And I think that that is part of the evolution process. We are not already there. We are still getting there, and we're getting there at different points. I feel I'm the same person in some ways as I was at 12. I really do. In some way, I don't feel very far away from whoever that was at 12 years old. But I've changed a lot in my outer forms, my language, and so on and so on. And when I say powerless, I really only mean the structural situation was that they could move us out of that house at any time. We couldn't do a thing about it. Our whole family had to gather our things up and we'd have to leave because we were renting on a month-to-month lease. We didn't have a security of a year's lease or 2 years lease. And we were aware of that. That is the fact of powerlessness in that sense. But I never felt that we were, my parents were, or that I personally was without power. You know, I mean, I knew there's certain things I couldn't do, but I didn't feel victimized by it. I didn't feel devastated. I didn't feel a loss of self-esteem. I mean, I wouldn't say I was without self-doubt. You know, you can't watch a lot of stuff go on and not say, well, maybe there's something wrong with me. So you go to the mirror and you say, supposing I would change my hairdo. Supposing my cheeks were a little narrower. Supposing this, supposing that, supposing. And finally you say, you know what? It's hopeless. You know, I'm not going to change all those things. And you know, a lot of friends of mine that I really like and respect look quite a lot like me. So what's the deal? Yeah, after a while, you got to work your way through it. That's all part of evolving too, you know. I think it's just like being alert, being aware of whatever it is that's going on you, and just open to what it is that you might be getting from that situation, and that you could give to it if you don't lock yourself down in some rigid way, some unyielding way. If you're just willing to hear whatever is there and listen to this other person very carefully and say more carefully what you really mean. Don't just say whatever kind of like easy stuff to say and get you by, but what do you really mean? If you can do that. And I think if you do that and the other person does that, you're going to move forward. This is that evolution process. That's the evolving that happens.
Lonnie, we'd like very much if you would look at a project that this class has worked on about Angel Island, which I think you know very well. And if you could just watch the monitor here.
Oh, okay.
With the oncoming news that Asian Americans are now the fastest growing minority population in the U.S., we want them to know more about the history of Asian American immigration.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Ann.
And I'm Peter Morales, and today we're going to talk about Angel Island. Angel Island is a National Historic Landmark and is also the largest island in the San Francisco Bay Area. But who knows anything about it? Ask around, your family, your friends, see if they heard of it. I bet most of the answers you get will be no. However, tens of thousands of Chinese people who came to America seeking the promise of a better life came to know Angel Island indeed. Years ago, Angel Island was designated to be the West Coast version of Ellis Island. In our mind's eye, we can picture the immigrants from all over the globe pouring into the United States, our melting pot, being welcomed and warmed by the thoughts of their new lives.
Imagine yourself taking all the money you've saved, getting on a crowded boat, traveling thousands of miles to follow a dream to a new life. You don't speak the language, yet you have to undergo a grueling interview to gain entry. And somehow, the thought of becoming a laborer in this new country still seem worthwhile. You get there to find out that you're not welcome. A law has been passed excluding you from entry. As the law put it, quote, Chinese laborers coming to the United States endanger the good order of certain localities. The coming of Chinese laborers into the United States is hereby suspended. So they were sent to the detention camps. That was Angel Island. There were no angels there. As they endured the long and humiliating process of finding out whether they would be admitted or turned away, the would-be immigrants etched their frustrations and their hopes on the walls of the barracks.
Because my house had bare walls, I began rushing all about. The waves are happy, laughing ha-ha. When I arrived on island, I heard I was forbidden to land. I could do nothing but frown and feel angry at heaven.
Shocking news, truly sad, reached my ears. We mourn you. When will they wrap your corpses for return? You cannot close your eyes. Whom are you depending on to voice your complaints? If you have foresight, you should have regretted coming here. Now you'll be forever sad and forever resentful. Think of the village. One can only futilely face the terrace for gazing homeward. Before you could fulfill your ambition, you were buried beneath earth and clay. I know that not even death could destroy your ambition.
When we arrived, they locked us up like criminals in compartments like the cages at the zoo. They counted and then took us upstairs to our rooms. There were 2 to 3 rooms in the women's section, all facing the shore. Each of the rooms could fit 20 to 30 persons. The spring beds could fold up. The main door was locked, but we could go into the other rooms from the hallway. The hall was wide, with tables and chairs where you could play dominoes. You didn't have to stay in your room during the day. You could come out into the hall. There was also an office there. We could ask questions of the white woman who took care of us at the office. One kid who had stayed for 2 years could speak English. He called her Mama. He was 8 or 9. He translated for us. The woman even gave the boys haircuts that were staying in the section at that time. There was also a backyard that was fenced in, so we couldn't get out. We could hang our wash out there. It wasn't too bad. It was just that you couldn't go out. The place was very clean. There were 2 bathrooms with 3 or 4 stalls inside of each. The toilet doors were cut off at the bottom so they could see your feet. Maybe it was because they were afraid of people committing suicide. There were wash basins, sinks, bathtubs, hot water, toilet paper, and soap for us to use. People chatted in the hallways or in their rooms, sang for pleasure, or read books. The old-timers were familiar with one another, but they left the newcomers pretty much alone. We were Sam Yup and didn't know them. When we arrived, we were kind of shy and distant, so there really wasn't much to say.
有笔初见到，谁知道此类双流。上落得志，成功日，定斩忽人潮不流。
Leaving behind my writing brush and removing my sword, I came to America. Who was to know 2 streams of tears would flow upon arriving here? There comes a day when I will have attained my ambition and become successful. I will certainly behead the barbarians and spare not a single blade of grass.
For 1 month, I was in prison. My slippers never moved forward. I came on the Manchuria and will return on the Mongolia. But if I could make the trip to Nanyang, I would. Why should America be the only place to seek a living?
I was forced to come to America. I had never seen my husband before. My mother matched me in marriage so I can bring the family over later. I had a passport to come when I was 16, but I didn't come till I was 23 when the Japanese attacked. Mary?
Most of us came as daughters of citizens or wives of businessmen. Other wives weren't allowed to come. I came as a granddaughter of a citizen. The papers had been purchased for me.
I have been in the wooden building for more than 10 days. My eyes have seen people being deported back.
Witnessing that scene makes one sad. Spending more than 5,000 gold coins, I drifted alone to this place. If I am unlucky enough to be deported, my parents will be grieved. The interest piles one on top of another. I do not know yet when it will be completely repaid to the creditor.
This is called an island of immortals, when in fact, this mountain is a prison. Once you see the open net, why throw yourself in? It is only because of empty pockets I can do nothing else.
Angel Island operated from 1910 to 1940. During this time, 75 to 80% of the Chinese arrivals eventually made it through immigration, but not before being humiliated, disengaged from their families, and terrified of their future.
Unlike its counterpart Ellis Island on the East Coast, Angel Island became more of a symbol of rejection than of welcome. It was not until 1943 that the exclusionary laws have been changed. And Angel Island will now be preserved to remind us of this period in our American history.
That's very moving. It must have meant a lot to you to do this piece, because I feel it in the piece, you know. When you come on camera to read those, I feel like you're kind of inside those things that you're saying. Is that true? Is that what happened to you? I mean, it's very different to be an outsider studying it, isn't it, than to do what you did, which is to really tell the story as if it were yours to say, right? You're taking on the voice of those people, putting your voice, your body into that. And it's very powerful to see that as a viewer. Are you pleased with this piece? Are you really proud of it? You're really, really proud of all people who helped you get it done. It's wonderful. It's very important. It's a very important piece. When they get that Angel Island thing going, they're going to be using your piece. And then you should be moving on to your next project, right?
And you're moving on to your next project?
Yeah, I'm still on it. I'm on my third one. It's a Lulu to finish. It's very complex because I have Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, and Asian Indians in it.
And you have to make a lot more up because you don't have the people who were there.
Yeah, still, I'm taking all the way almost to the beginning of World War II. So I am in that period when there's a little more footage.
So there are some people now in this
yeah,
part.
A little bit more. And I just use freely people who are connected to that time. There's more connection to that time. It's because it's closer in time to us. But your piece is wonderful. I really love it. And I hope that you're very proud of it. It's great, Gary. It's great that you guys who did this, who worked
Loni
on
Ding,
this.
thank you very much
Yes,
for
I
coming and
thank you.
sharing yourself with us
I
today.
really appreciate being here with you. Thank you.